April 12, 1861 was the date when the war in America between the North and the South began. Many issues occurred in America during this time which caused differences between opinions in both. As each side was fighting for their beliefs, the North finally won the war on May 9, 1865. The topic of whether or not America actually changed as a result of the Civil War has been a discussion for many years. Today I'm here to talk to you as to why America was not changed. The Civil War did not fundamentally change America due to the issue that the South still needed to depend on slavery for their income, America's inability to resolve the issue of nationalism versus sectionalism, and that African Americans still lacked basic human privileges following the war. Following the Civil War, the South was suffering from a weak economy due to the dependence they had on slaves for work. Slaves were responsible for working on plantations in the South to maintain crops during the Civil War. In the South, there was only one major crop that allowed for the territory to gain an income. During the time, Southerners had begun to reap huge profits from cotton on their plantations. Farmers in the South greatly depended on the production of cotton to get money. Unfortunately, for the South, after the Civil War ended, they were struggling to produce cotton because slavery was abolished. The South could not use slaves anymore to work on their plantations. When there was an increase in cotton production, there would also be an increase in the number of slaves. However, that was not occurring after the war. This meant the South had to find new workers that would work for them for cheap. The decrease in the cotton production by the South led to them to switch their ways to gain income. Following the Civil War, the South was forced to transition into industrialization because it was their only successful way to get money. While this might have been a big change for the South, it did not necessarily ensure them to gain more profit. Actually, the South economy suffered even more when they switched to industrialization. Following the war, the South spent most of their time and money trying to fix their land. This caused the South to lack an income. They were facing many financial issues during Reconstruction. However, for them to gain more money to pay for Reconstruction, they needed to sell goods from their industries. Now, due to no slavery, the South had to hire workers in their factories who got fair pay. The South was forced to use money they didn't have. Following the Civil War, there was little change for the South because they still needed to rely on slavery for their economy. Unfortunately, slavery was not an option anymore. As years passed following the Civil War, America was still unable to resolve the issue of nationalism versus sectionalism. The North and the South both disagreed on what was best. The North focused more on making the nation better as a whole, while the South focused on making their region better as a whole. These two methods caused a division among the two regions. There was a constant dispute because there was never an agreement on what actions would happen. Finally, the North won the Civil War, which was thought to end the disputes. However, due to the North winning the Civil War, the South was forced to follow all the rules of the North. The South did not always believe that the decisions the North were making were the right decisions. This caused the South to openly rebel against the North. There were occasions where some settlers went west to escape debts or even the law. Even most pushed westward in search for economic gain. The South tried to expand away from the North to avoid their laws because they wanted to make their region strive instead of the nation. Following the North's win of the Civil War, there was still an issue between nationalism versus sectionalism in the North and the South. African Americans were still not granted their basic citizen privileges. They were unable to participate in everyday activities that were meant to be granted to everyone. There were laws stating that no Negroes shall be permitted to preach, exhort, or otherwise declaim congregations of colored people. Due to the color of their skin, some citizens were incapable of expressing their opinions at open meetings. However, while their privileges may have been provoked, people argue that there is a big change for them because they were granted freedom from slavery. Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing all slaves in areas of the Union that were in rebellion. Unfortunately, just because a slave was set free did not mean they were necessarily free. There are laws that continue to state that no Negro shall reside within the limits of the town of Opelousas who is not in the regular service of some white person or former owner. This forced African Americans to still work for their former owners. Even though many of them suffered on their plantations they previously worked on, they needed to continue to work there just in order to get basic privileges. The Civil War did not change for African Americans due to their inability to still not maintain basic citizen rights. The Civil War took place in hopes to create change to better America as a whole. Instead, it did just the opposite. Following the war, the South was still economically struggling, there was still a division among the North and the South, and African Americans were still not seen as equal. Tonight, I hope you all understand why the Civil War did not fundamentally change America. It was all due to the issue that the South still needed to depend on slavery for their economy, America's inability to resolve the issue of nationalism versus sectionalism, and that African Americans still lacked basic human privileges following the war.